Making decisions about healthcare. This film features family carers involved in decisions about healthcare for a relative with learning disabilities. Sue and John Picton's children, Matthew and Joe, have a condition which affects their ability to eat and drink. Both have had a peg fitted.
It's basically a feeding tube that goes through the abdomen wall straight into the stomach. For somebody who can't swallow,
or who swallows impaired,
the peg is a way of getting water and nutrition and medication into them.
Well, the first time we had to think about a peg was Josephine's second aspiration pneumonia. They decided with the speech and language therapist and people in the hospital that she should have a peg because this could happen again. And they also talked to the National Hospital and they said that, the mitochondrial disease things do gradually get more difficult for them, as we've seen. So Jo had her peg fitted. And I remember, I think the Mental Capacity Act hadn't been fully implemented. It was on the statute book, but it hadn't been implemented. And I remember standing outside the hospital on my mobile phone. I was phoning around the speech and language therapist himself, someone else, trying to make sure that everybody agreed, but there was no formal best interest meeting. Within 3 to 6 months, she was transformed. She was so much better than she had been for the previous 18 months.
As Jo's health improved, Matthew's deteriorated, and Sue and John sought advice about a peg for Matthew.
We went to the doctors, we got a referral to the gastroenterologist who saw Matthew in the October and could see he wasn't looking well at all and he was losing weight, which worried everybody, the carers and ourselves. And so he was put on the waiting list. By then, the Mental Capacity Act had been implemented. And actually, when we went to that, the consultation, he had a form that had to go around everybody. And we talked to Matthew, who really did understand that he would have to have a peg and that it would help keep him well. And he agreed by nodding. So there wasn't any dispute. We had by then come to terms that realised that actually it was to their advantage, even though there were issues around peg care and et cetera, but we'd seen how Jo had benefited. I talked to the speech and language therapist this week, actually, when I knew this was happening, just to make sure I'd got all the facts right. And she said she felt that Matthew's experience of Josephine had been really, really important. Josephine wasn't involved in the decision because it was taken out of her hands. And I think what was interesting was we signed a consent for her with this very informal phone around and everybody agreed.
Yeah, there was a best interest process.
Sue and John were convinced that Matthew understood the implications of having a peg, but was his capacity to consent to the procedure ever formally assessed?
No, and that was something that worried me. There wasn't any formal assessment of his capacity, but it was sort of assumed he lacked capacity. Hence this form that started off with the consultant and then went round the various parties. But the consultant he was very nice with Matthew and very respectful of him and involved him in discussions in the consultation prior to setting the admission. And he himself was convinced that Matthew understood enough of what was going to happen to agree. So whether Matthew was deemed to have capacity or not is still a mystery to me. And I think there are ongoing issues around the implementation of the Mental Capacity Act because Jo and Matthew can communicate. I mean, I was a bit worried at one stage. Matthew will very easily say no to all sorts of things. And I was thinking that we were both thinking, weren't we? We were worried, oh God, say if he goes into his no line. But we talked through with Matthew before we went and we didn't try and control his response or anything and just said we thought that it would be a really good idea. It would be a bit uncomfortable while it was being fitted and it meant he had to go to hospital. It meant that afterwards, they could give medicine to him if he got poorly without him having to taste all the horrible tastes of medicine and that it would keep him fitter. And that seemed to work. But I do think his experience of Jo's peg helped.
When someone is unable to make a decision, family carers have a vital role to play in providing healthcare professionals with advice and information, even though the final decision about serious medical treatment will be made by a clinician. For less serious healthcare decisions, family carers may take the lead in working out what is in their relative's best interests.
When he was having the MRI, we said, Mitch, you're going to have an MRI. What it means is that you're going to have to be in a tube. And I say to the people themselves, can you please explain to Mitchell what's happening to him? So we always go through that process of explaining. Whether he understands is something different, because I remember being in the tube, I was quite next to him. I said, I'd like to be close to him because he can see me. So he was like, Mitchell, don't move your head. And it was kind of every minute he was shifting. And you think, well, he's got to be in there for 45 minutes. Can he really do that? You know, and it's decisions like that you have to make. And you say, well, is it in Mitchell's best interest for him to be sitting in this drum for 45 minutes for us to determine what's going on with his brain? Or is it going to be too difficult? And the decision that I made was 45 minutes, we're going to have to try, because it's really important. But Mitchell himself wouldn't have been able to say, oh yeah, Mum, that's all right, I'll stay for 45 minutes. Because I think whilst he understands time, I think in terms of what's involved in it, I don't think he'll be able to do that. I said, we're looking really at very limited capacity, but we are trying our best to ensure that we involve him in the process, because I think it's his right to be involved in that.
A family carer may apply to the Court of Protection to become a health and welfare deputy when a series of linked decisions need to be made in the best interests of a relative who lacks capacity. But the Court of Protection does not often grant health and welfare deputyship. Having successfully applied for deputyship to manage their son Nicky's financial affairs, Pete and Wendy Crane hoped to be able to use similar authority to plan what should happen if Nicky needed healthcare in the future.
We didn't realise at the time that there had to be an issue with Nick's welfare before you could apply for deputyship for that. So unfortunately, I suppose it was our lack of knowledge and our solicitor's lack of knowledge that we really shouldn't have applied for it at the time, but we did.
I think what our case seems to have highlighted is that it's important with a person-centred plan to be able to plan someone's financial life, and the Mental Capacity Act seems to support that point of view. But as Nicky's mum and dad, we wanted to have made a plan for if his health should suddenly take a turn for the worse.
Best interest procedures must be followed in all decisions relating to healthcare treatment. This means that family carers and others should be consulted whenever treatment is proposed for someone who lacks capacity. Families can also ensure that good plans are in place well before the need for healthcare treatment arises.
Our doctor is very much aware of the health action plan. So every time Mitchell goes to the doctor, he then puts in what Mitchell has gone to see him for, and he signs it. I was at one of our walk-in centres because somebody who had a disability walked in with their health action plan, and it was handed, the support worker handed it to the person, and she just looked at it and put it aside. And I'm thinking, well, this would be helpful to tell you whether that person has a needle phobia or exactly how you can support that person. So I know from experience, although we have all these plans, a lot of professionals don't really take any notice of them. And I think this is something we need to raise awareness of, and for carers and families themselves to know that they should really try and insist that professionals do take notes of what's written down about our children.
If this film has raised issues that you would like to talk about, the Family Carer Support Service will try to help. You can telephone them on 0117 906 1751 or email familycarersupport@hft.org.uk. www.health.org.uk.